should. And we should be live.
All right, let's see how many seconds behind we are.
I just got a thing that said we're live. It looks like we're live.
Go.
And we are. How the heck do I turn my phone? Mute. There we go. Welcome, everybody.
It's you and me, pal.
It's you and me and 10 other people.
Big boss.
How's everybody doing? It's been a while. Sam's too distracted from his...
Just trying to get myself set up here.
Yeah.
Are you the, are you Big Boss? Or is that somebody else?
I don't know. I'm just gonna go under my own name.
All right, hold tight. I am just getting my life together here. And so, you know, there's so many things to talk about, by the way, that it's really nice to be in summer mode, to be able to read more and catch up on a lot of stuff that's happening in the world, and just have time to let my mind float a little bit and expand and just think about some things differently without the pressures of having to turn events of the world into ideas that can be translated to an audience of mostly in the classroom anyway, mostly 20-year-olds, but you know, just just people, other people. So it's been really nice to have the space to do that. And as soon as I kick in gear here, I will be able to read the chat.
Yeah, and I apologize if we have any audio issues. We're trying to deal with these things as they come. We don't really have a great audio setup, but we're gonna roll with it for now. Plus, we're in a giant room, and that means it's really hard for us to get really nice, concise audio because there's so much. Like when Hunter Thomas is filled, you don't hear a massive echo. But since no one is here, that's what we're getting. So if the audio doesn't get any better, please just keep messaging me. I'll try and fix it as we go along. I'm looking at an audio bar, but it should be okay by now. Thank you everybody for watching. Big Boss, Paul, Guy, All This Power, Musicians Electricity, John watching from a whole nother country in Europe, it seems like.
It does. So we do have a message that the volume's a little low, so
yeah, I got it mostly fixed, I think.
All right, sounds good. Hey, so I was saying that one of the things that I'm really working on now is just trying to think about some things in new ways. It's really so many things are happening, and I think in the middle of a semester, in the middle of the year, my mind is so focused on doing lots of things that I have to do in order to keep our center going and keep the class going and so on, that I often times don't have enough space in my life to think more openly or in a more amplified way about events in the world and so on. So it's really so it's nice to do that. I see that Joy is online. Nice to see you, Joy. We should have had you here helping out this morning. Hey, so I'm really curious, be quite curious to see what kinds of questions people have, and it's going to work best for me as always when I do one of these chats. I think, Jeff, if people can throw some questions out and then I can respond to them, because I didn't come in with anything prepared or anything that I would say right off the bat.
I have one thing that maybe we can talk about, and that is what have we been up to since the class ended? Because it's crazy that we haven't uploaded anything to YouTube in over a month. But it's funny for me because I've been working on YouTube every day.
Yeah.
But we're just not uploading anything because I'm working on the summer course. And then you went to Peru for what, 2 weeks?
Yeah. Yeah.
How was that? That was your first time, right?
First time in Peru. I used to live in Ecuador, and while I was living in Ecuador, I had the opportunity to go, but I never did. And we were working with some students, Peruvian students, engineering students down there, building a team between 20 Peruvian engineers and 16 Penn State student engineers. And so the job for Lori and I was to make things as awkwardly as possible so that students in these two different languages, and most of the Americans, they were mostly Americans, knew some Spanish, and most of the Peruvian students knew a little bit of English, but to make it as awkwardly as possible, as people would really engage one another, because a lot of times that's what has to happen, right? You got to be awkward because you have to be, you got to bust through that veneer. It keeps us from communicating with one another. So it was good. Yep. And then what we've been doing, I think, is just really getting things in place, kind of finalizing stuff from last year and taking the space right now to deal with technological issues and kind of build things up in a new way. And you're rebuilding the website.
Soon.
Soon. Listen, by the way, I'm 58 years old, or 58 years young. Big boss. Just so you know that. I don't feel like 58. I think it's because I spend so much time around people who are in their early 20s that I don't know. I just don't kind of feel. So is religion necessary? Here, let's just go right here. This is one I've actually been thinking about because I've been, it's one that I've been thinking about a fair amount. I think religion is absolutely necessary, and it's inevitable because human beings are going to get caught up in the existential questions. You know, where do we come from, and what are we doing here, and where are we going when we die? What happens when we die? And it's so fascinating being in Peru and looking at the ways in which the Incas really addressed those questions and what they thought and how they thought. And, you know, we know a little bit about it, but there are lots of ways that we know about it, but it just seems to me that people are going to need to answer those existential questions. And invariably what's going to happen is that they're going to come together around shared ideas about how to answer those questions, because mostly we're going to, you know, the outlying kind of questions, the extreme ideas are going to give way to the more majority ideas. And so whatever those are, right, and things that people will agree on. And once they agree on it, then they're going to start writing things down or directing rituals, and they're going to start responding in some, I would say, collective way, and then build rituals around that and have some collective ideas that they all agree upon, and then build religious text around that or create it around that. And then before you know it, you have a large group of people who are acting and thinking in a very similar way. And this is the fertile ground out of which religions are born. And I just think it's inevitable because people want to share their lives with other people. So you're going to share the way you respond to existential questions with other people. So I think, religion is fundamentally necessary. By the way, Spanish. To Chaco, I started speaking Spanish when I was when I was in an undergrad and lived in Spain, and then I've spent a lot of time in Spanish-speaking countries. I should speak Spanish better than I do, but I speak Spanish relatively well. Are we preparing themes for next course? No, we're really not. So I just let ideas come to me, and then I write them down mostly when I don't forget, and then I have ideas about what I might want to talk about. But mostly in this class, I wait until a day or so before to see what's happening in the news and what I feel inspired to talk about, maybe what students are asking, or different people are asking, and then that's what I do in class. So it's rare anymore that I have a particular idea or a particular thought about something way ahead of time, or have really identified lectures.
It's kind of annoying sometimes, because I'm trying to get the social media team to be able to, actually promote what we're going to talk about, and that's really difficult when Sam's thinking of what we're going to talk about 6 hours before the class starts. And so people will come up to me and they'll be like, "Hey Jeff, what are we going to talk about today?" I have no idea. Sam doesn't have any idea. It really, this class really does happen. The planning for it happens very quickly. But it's funny looking back at the summer course, and I'm transcribing all of the lectures, and it's very interesting how we don't plan for this class, and yet it happens in the way that it happens. It's really cool.
Hey, listen, Paul Gee, it looks like, asked this question about if anyone had any thoughts about what sport has the best athletes, and realizing that best is subjective and so on, right? It's funny that I'm going to say, obviously, best depends on how you want to operationalize best, right? But the other day, I was watching a competition with people playing ping pong, right, table tennis, and I was watching the moves that they were making and the things they were doing and how quickly they were responding to the ball, and I had this thought go through my mind: these are amazing athletes. And so, yeah, maybe. And then I had the thought that went through my mind about how in every field of endeavor, every field of competition, right, you have to bring the mind, the body, and the spirit together in a really unique way to be an athlete, because that's what it means, is, right? It's like pushing your body in new directions, but pushing your mind in new directions, and then pushing all of your emotional and kind of spiritual characteristics, right? And because it's all at the premier level, it's all, those three all go together. And I was thinking about this, wow, who would be the best athletes? Because I was watching these people play ping pong, and I was thinking, that right there, that is some amazing athleticism, right? So
I was watching, I have never paid attention really to the Stanley Cup until this season, and I was watching the game last night, and it was just astounding to me how fast, like you said, how fast the puck was moving.
Yeah.
And every time, it's so funny because really it's Chicago and Boston versus the entirety of North America, excluding Mexico.
Yeah.
So everyone's going for the Blues except for Boston and Chicago, because Chicago hates the Blues. And every time that somebody would get the puck, it was just I don't know what's going to happen, because it just it would just transfer so quickly. And then for 3 minutes it's the Blues on offense, and then for 5 minutes they're on defense, and it's just insane. I love sports. I like American football. Probably it's the best sport in my opinion in terms of wanting to watch it, but that's also only college. I hate the NFL. So even within its own sport, I hate some of it and enjoy some of it.
Yeah, I'm with you on hockey. I'm blown away by how fast things
Have you ever been to have you been to Pagula yet?
To where?
Pagula.
I have not.
Yeah, I've just been inside once, and it's nice, but I want to go. They're thinking about bringing the Penguins and Flyers here.
Yeah.
They've been in talks. That'd be sweet, because we're about halfway in between both cities.
Okay, listen. For me, let me say something about. I think sociological jargon. One of the things that turned me off to sociology fairly early on was this sense that I had to maybe learn the jargon, learn the concepts, learn all the definitions and so on. And when I was in studying for my master's, so my bachelor's, master's, and PhD are all in sociology. And when I was studying for my master's, I really tried to learn the jargon, the concepts, thinking that I needed to learn that. And then pretty quickly, once I started teaching, I realized I started talking about this. So this was when I was maybe 24. I taught my first class when I was 20. I was just turning 24. By the way, it was a class on cybernetics in human ecology, and I didn't know what cybernetics was. And I walked into the classroom saying, I don't even know what cybernetics is. So if anyone knows, please tell me. And people were probably a little bit thrown off by that. But I was young, and at least I had to admit that I was ignorant. But I guess Okay, so anyway, I tried to learn the concepts, but when I started teaching, I started to talk about those concepts, but then I realized I didn't know what they meant. And so I couldn't really say anything about them other than define them. You know, like culture. Culture is this, and then I would define it and then not have anything more to say. And so I fairly quickly realized that concepts get in the way, and they're just kind of a way to keep us from actually having to think for ourselves. And so I stopped using concepts, and even to this day, I don't know what some of the main sociological concepts are, except the ones that my wife creates and develops, and then those I learn because I live them. But I don't really know what concepts are and the jargon and so on, so I don't use it. So if people watch the class or you watch the stream in the class, you realize that I don't have anything. I never use concepts because they mean nothing to me. If you can't talk about the ideas or what's behind them, then I can leave them go. So which is what I do.
It's almost like the jargon's surface level.
Yeah, it's surface level. It's really just about talking about, it's sort of like talking about the clothing that somebody is wearing, but not talking about the person. And so you can define the clothing all you want, but it doesn't really say anything about what's underneath the clothing. And so I realized that if I wanted to become a thinker, I had to stop talking about definitions and these kinds of things. And I had to actually start thinking for myself and thinking about what they meant. And so I started to, at a certain age, maybe when I was around 30, to really begin to develop my own ideas, my own concepts, my own thoughts about things. And then that took me in a new direction. And in terms of psychology and sociology, I think it's not about which one is most beneficial. It's about which instructor can transmit the information, whether it's sociology or psychology, in a way that brings a person to life. So, anything we do, whatever we want to talk about or think about, depends on the person delivering the information. And so if that person, could have lots of really interesting ideas, but can't deliver the ideas, can't kind of convey them in a way that makes them interesting to somebody else. And so that's certainly true with teachers. And then maybe a person doesn't have really that, isn't a really great thinker, but can take simple ideas and put them out into the world in a way that leads other people to say, wow, that's actually really interesting, which we see a lot of, right? I think sometimes that's what I do. I think one of the things I'm able to do is I think in very simple terms, and I kind of break the world down in very simple ways, and I have an ability to put those thoughts out there, but it's not particularly complex. And I think that's why a lot of students, young people anyway, who are just starting to think about things in new ways, kind of can react positively to what I'm doing because I'm not being too complex, in part because I can't think in really complex ways, but maybe. So that's a thought. Hey, Lahore, Pakistan. Mona, I was actually almost coming to Pakistan and to Lahore over in December, but instead we went to, we needed to go to Iraq, so we went to Erbil, but I really want to get to Pakistan. So here's a question. What was the atmosphere like in University Park after the DA decided not to charge the officers a few weeks ago? And so if you don't know, we had a situation here which a young man who is of African ancestry was shot and killed by the police. I was not here, so I was in Peru, but I know that some. Were you here?
Yep. Yeah, I was here, and it actually happened like right next to my old place.
Mm-hmm. So what happened when the DA? I know that some.
When the original story dropped, everyone was kind of like, understanding of why the police did what they did, and then eventually, everyone started asking questions, and there was a little bit of a visual like on College and Allen.
Yeah.
But besides that, there hasn't really been anything. I don't know of anybody really even trying to contact the State College Police Department.
Yeah, I think some things are happening behind the scenes, and actually,
yeah, for sure. I would hope so.
Yeah, there's a lot of people are really working to build bridges between the police and the community, and it's really as you know, as these things often go, it looks one way from the outside, it looks a different way from the inside, and so it's certainly so a lot of stuff is happening. But hey, so one response to it looks like Mylin, that our class often looks filled to capacity, and what's the reputation? What's my reputation among students? What's my reputation? Well, generally speaking, so I've been here for teaching here at Penn State going on 29 years. I'm finishing my 29th year. It's mostly positive. I mean, this class is an elective class, so nobody has to take it. So it's a choice. I've been teaching it now 28 years. It's never not filled to capacity. It used to be, I started with 150 students, then I went to 200, then 240, and then 480, and then to 720, and now we're at 780. It always fills to capacity. That doesn't mean that everybody appreciates the class or appreciates me or has, mostly it's positive, or else it wouldn't fill. But as I've shifted over the years in different ways, in terms of changing the kinds of things that I want to talk about or I think are important to talk about, that means that, some people of a different intellectual framework will be more interested in the class, and other people will be less interested in the class. So now we do many more things on international issues. So there's a sector of students who think really we should only focus on the United States, and there's another sector who think we should only focus on international issues, and so on. So also, I don't always take an anti-American perspective, or I don't kind of beat up or challenge. Maybe beat up. It's not challenge, but it's really beat up on maybe white people as much as some people might like me to do, or men, or whatever it is. So there's always people who are unhappy with how things are, but mostly the class is seen in a very positive way, and mostly students feel like I'm fair. Like I'll challenge them to think about things in new ways. So even if they disagree with certain things that I'm saying, they walk away feeling challenged, and that's good because that's my main goal. And that I'm fair, like as much as I won't go too extreme in one way or the other. So I think that's the reputation of the class and my reputation on campus. And the class is actually, it's not difficult, but there's a lot of work. You have to do the work. And if you don't, you can very quickly get a grade that you don't really want to get. So it's a difficult class.
I wonder what the reputation of our class is after the fact that now we're live streaming, because I haven't really been able to talk to students who've never taken the class, who've heard that we live stream the class. Like, I'm not sure if people will start thinking that it's not worth coming, but it has totally a different feel and atmosphere than if you just watch it online. Yeah,
I think if you're here, it's funny, I get comments. I've been sort of reading comments on the stream a fair amount this summer. I just have had more time. I never look at the stream, so I don't really have a sense of what people say or how they comment. And so but I have been taking more time to do that. And and it's funny how often it is that people make comments that or have certain insights about what I say or what happens in class that if they were sitting here, they wouldn't say that or they wouldn't think that. They would feel the energy in a different way. So that's kind of
I think it'd be cool if we like broke down a little bit more of the police incident, just because there's been updates with Joy and Reese talking about it. So to try to just explain it quickly, when was it, like late May, I think?
No, it was in April.
So in April, late April, early May is what I think I meant. There was a family member who called the police and said, hey, we haven't heard from our son who, they said he had mental illness, right?
So here, let me tell the story, because I'm actually connected a little bit. As often goes, the parents were a little bit concerned with their son, who had dealing. You know, it's hard. I don't know if I want to tell. I actually would rather not tell this story. It's kind of it was just a young man who had some just some emotional and intellectual, just some disabilities, and just was really not stabilized. And so when the police came to his door, because the parents were concerned about his well-being and so on, and the police came to the door, he charged at the police with a knife, and in the end they couldn't get him to drop the knife, and they tried a taser and that didn't work, and then they shot him. And there are just so many pieces of this that are just immensely tragic, that are just really, really tragic. And you know, and of course it's one of these things that we see from the outside, and we look at it, we imagine it, and if we're not in the middle of it, or if we weren't there, or we're not part, you just can't know, you can't understand. I mean, there's certain pieces that, you know, the next day we talked about it in class and talked about this kind of paramilitary kind of policing that is sweeping the United States, and increasingly how we are, you know, creating a society with, you know, that's heavily militarized by police units on one hand, among civilians that's heavily militarized because so many people have guns and weapons, and there's a culture of violence in the sense of, you know, the ways in which we elevate violence to something that's to be proud of or happy about, or to be entertainment and so on. And I don't mean, I'm not speaking as a liberal or a leftist when I say that, but I am speaking as a sociologist who is just even objectively looking at what we're doing. So the police say, hey, you know, or some people say, it's a really dangerous world and we need to have militarized police, and, you know, people need to carry guns and arm themselves and so on. And other people say, well, actually, like most of the sociologists would say, well, look, if you actually look at the chances of being a victim of a violent crime and so on, it's actually fairly low. You're much more likely to get harmed or hurt in a car accident on your next trip across an interstate or across a city than you are to be a victim of a violent crime. And so maybe we should put our energy into thinking about those matters. But, you know, but then you can take the other side and say, well, but that's just inevitable. We can't control that, but we can control whether we're a victim of violent crime if I arm myself or arm the police and that sort of thing. And so, you know, we're living in this very complex world where we can see this from lots and lots of different perspectives. And so
for me, it was just crazy that, like, when the story first originally hit, everyone was telling, like, oh, like, the police did the right thing, and then afterwards it was like, oh no, all he did was step towards the police, like, and we're just constantly changing the story to make our own narrative. And more things are coming out, and so protesters, like Joy said, that there was a protest at some point, and like, but what are they protesting? The violence? Are they protesting the fact that the police state is wrong? Like, and can we really blame all of these things?
Yeah, I'll just say the following, and I'll just move on, because I don't want to weigh in on this. I just don't feel like I'm in a space where I'd like to do that. Other than to say, I find that it's really immensely difficult to be fully educated on lots and lots of things. And like, I don't, I think about how much I don't know about being a soldier, or I don't know about being a police officer, or I don't know about being a high school teacher because I've never been one, or there are any number of things I just don't know about. And so it's really easy for me as an outsider to just sort of look at pieces of something and critique it and say, oh, that person should be different. I was thinking about this the other day, about that in Parkland, Florida, the resources officer, right, the police resources officer didn't go into the building when that shooting was happening a year ago, and now he's actually being charged with a crime as opposed to, just losing his job.
Trump called him a coward, I think, too.
Yeah, and so, and when the other police showed up, and he was just walking back and forth outside one of the doorways saying, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. And I think, well, it makes sense. How is it possible that more people don't have breakdowns in that way, right? Don't panic, go into panic mode and then freeze. Like, that just seems like that's part of the process. And I thought, for the first time, I actually put myself in that person's shoes, and I said, I don't care how much training I have, I don't care how prepared I am, there's gonna be some moment in the world when I freeze and I panic. And so, wow, that seems what happened to that person. Like, so is that criminal? Like, how is that criminal, right? And so I just thought, man, how complex this is as a case, and who's going to argue this in a court of law, right? And what are they going to turn toward, and how you could probably quite thoughtfully make any argument that you want. And of course, that's what it's about. So anyway, on another note, Sudan, I have been following Sudan, and I have a connection through different people to Sudan, and it's really, once again, it is a push by civilians from below. The shooting, by the way, in State College was March 20th, and it's once again what we're seeing in Sudan is a push from below by large numbers of civilians, oftentimes prompted by organized groups like political parties and so on. But in the end, civilians going out, people going out and saying, "Hey, we want more power. We want to address these issues, these intractable issues, whatever it is in this particular society that we're in. We want to address these intractable issues in a way that really." That our government isn't doing, and then the government, and the Sudanese government, is really responding with this immense amount of violence, as is often the case, right? Because the state holds the control of the violence and is responding in that way. So, and so it's just really quite troubling, actually. And I can't. It's one of these things where sometimes I want to go into it more, but I don't, because most of us are not interested. And as a generalist, I know enough to understand what's going on, and I'm following it enough to understand what's going on. But the deep sort of politics of Sudanese politics, I'm not. The problem. So I want to respond to this statement. No one understands violence. No one who understands violence remotely wants it. My attitude is that if my life is ever in danger, however remote, I want that confrontation to be very lopsided. I don't think anybody really. I hear that. I would be a person who, on one hand, would agree with that. On the other hand, the problem is, it's what's it mean to say, so your version of your life being in danger is going to be different in all likelihood than my version or somebody else's version, right? And I think that a lot of times this is what we're arguing about. So, in the case of this young man in State College, we'd say, well, the police officer's life is in danger. He came out, the police officers, 3 of them, with a 5-inch serrated steak knife. And so you could easily make the argument. It's like, well, police officers have batons that are pretty powerful. Just pull your baton out and knock the knife out of his hand. That doesn't take a whole lot. And so many people have made that argument. And so you could say, well, but still, I don't have space for that at all, right? Like I don't want any danger, right? You can make that argument and say, so therefore I'm just going to get my gun out and stop any possibility for danger. But somebody else could say, hang on, you're not entitled to that level of not being in danger, right? Like that's just not. And then what if the person was 10 feet away? You're with a steak knife, you're still in danger per se, because they could throw the knife at you, and maybe, I don't know, 1 in 100 tries it would stick in you somehow in a way that could be really dangerous. So you could say, well, 1 in 100, I'm not willing to live with that. And someone else could say, come on, man, be serious. So this is what we're struggling with all the time. And I think that we're a lot of times we're having arguments about things without stopping to actually look at the complexities of what we're arguing about. And so I don't know, what is. Yeah. So, what do we have?
Nobody's.
I'm freezing up, by the way. So.
You're freezing up, meaning you're running out of things to say?
No, my
or your computer's freezing.
Yeah, my computer's freezing.
Gotcha.
And so I'm thinking about if anybody else has. We're really right now, by the way, so you all know, we're just trying to test the stream. We have some new equipment that we're working with. We're testing it, see how it goes. We're going to do a couple more of these in the summertime before the class kicks in. Maybe bring some guests in to talk with them. But so right now we're just kind of seeing how things go. And Ananda, I want to go back to a question. Do I feel a need to align with any particular perspectives, like a Marxist, functionalist, or interactionist? No, I don't. I don't align with any perspectives. I draw on all the different sociological perspectives in different ways, in different times, because they all say something useful about how the world is organized, and so I want to work with those. But I don't draw on one at any one moment, and sometimes I don't draw on any of them. I just come up with my own thoughts about how things are organized or how things work. So, yeah.
It seems like if you really are living your life in a constant state of thought, you're never going to align yourself 100% with anything.
Yeah, exactly.
Because if you are, then you're excluding a whole bunch of information. I just watched, it's for the summer course, it's class 5, and it's choice and chance, and just going back and forth of like, you have to look at the one side and then at the same time look at the other side, because they're both valuable.
Yeah, I find myself, right, it's choice and chance. If you think about that, you just kind of go back and forth, and it's really impossible to stop anywhere, right? If you ever stop that process of asking the question, wait, hang on, is is this a decision that I'm making or that people are making, or to what degree is it that, and to what degree is it are factors and forces outside of our control involved, and what degree, of course, is it both, which it always is, and they intersect, and how do they intersect, and the ways in which they do, and the complexities of that. And thinking that at any one moment in time I could just land on one side as opposed to another and stay there is just to me, the sign that somebody's not thinking very thoughtfully or clearly. So for me, it's just really impossible to land anywhere. And so I find myself constantly, moving back and forth and reading things that I've never wanted to read about. So, like, for example, the one with the resources officer, the police officer in Parkland, Florida, who, so if you're listening and you don't know the story, what happened was there was a school shooting in the United States in Florida last year, and there was a police officer who was on campus. He had an office in the building in the high school, and so instead of going from the one building to the other, apparently to go in and confront the shooter and stop the shooting, he didn't go in the door. He stood outside and he just paced back and forth because he froze, and so that was really the when I saw an article about that and about what happened with him, I said, wow, I want to read this article because I had a perspective on it before I read the article. It's like, well, you're a police officer, right? This is your job. Like, well, it doesn't matter if it's your job. If you freeze, you freeze, right? There are all sorts of things that happen, right? Like, my job is to teach. But what happens if one day I show up? I've been doing it for 35 years, right? What happens if one day I show up and I just have a panic? I go into panic mode, whatever reason, and I just can't teach. That's real, right? So it put me in a different framework, and it made me actually start to think about some things a little bit differently. So that was very, very intense, actually.
Yeah, I also get the other side because, like, yeah, he got nervous and he froze and all this, but he is a cop, and part of his training is to deal with these situations.
I know, but part of the training, sometimes we fail. Like, sometimes I fail in this room, right? I'm teaching, and I say something wrong. I say something, it's just like my training is to be open to all sides, to be able to, kind of reflect on things in an interesting way. I mean, do all sorts of things, and sometimes I just fail, and like, whoa. And so it's just the implications are different in different places, right? So
yeah, but you're still doing your job with coming and teaching the class, even if your lesson isn't the best. At least you tried. And the argument that's being made from the side that wants him to be prosecuted for a crime is that he didn't even try. In fact, when the other police officers got there, he was like, "Don't go in there. There's a school shooting happening."
Yeah,
and it's that's what you're here for. Like, if I knew that.
But that's part of the failure.
It's part of the failure. Like, I had in my high school, I think I graduated with like 700, 600-ish people. And so, like, 2,400 students in this high school, and we had one cop. And if we found out that if there was a fight that broke out and he didn't do anything about it, like, we'd be like, what are you doing? And that's like his everyday thing. And then when something else happens, like, for instance, like, let's say a parent emails you and you just don't know what to do. Yeah. That's still part of your job. Like, this was a huge part of his job, and it just, he really did a poor job. I don't think he should necessarily be prosecuted for crimes, but I can see the argument of why he needed to do more. It's almost like I was just going to go into the whole Sandusky thing and how a show could have done more, but people can always do more. It's just I can really see and understand how people expected more from this particular guy because of the job that he has.
I can absolutely see that. I think that for myself, trying to be have thoughtful ideas about the world, I guess I'm just willing to entertain all perspectives, including how could I see this as criminal, and how could I see it as not criminal? The fact that he didn't enter in, and the truth is, I can see it both ways. And as someone who teaches, and certainly teaches the kinds of courses that I do, I guess my job is to always try to see things in multiple ways. So I guess maybe that's why I see an article like that and I say, hey, I want to, that's not a perspective I have. Let me go into it and let me see if I can adopt that, if I can understand that perspective so that, and adopt it enough that I could put it out into the world, so give people an opportunity to be challenged by it if they think differently, right? And so that's kind of, it makes it sometimes difficult. For me, it makes it sometimes difficult to land anywhere, like really stand on something or to believe in anything, because I'm always taking different positions. Hey, so Mona, really quickly, my friendship with Bassem. Bassem will be coming to Penn State again in the fall. We're thinking late September, early October, sometime when it's nice here and he can experience the changing of the leaves and so on.
Yeah, last time
really
he came in, it was still cold.
It was pretty cold. So, yeah, it's really it's funny how I have a connection with Bassem in a way that he at this stage in life is, I don't have a lot of close friends in a way. I have lots and lots of friends and lots of acquaintances and lots of friends who live in other countries. People I'm really connected with, men in particular, but Bassem is one of them, who I just feel a real connection, and it makes it kind of a little bit disconcerting in a way, given all that has happened to Bassem and his family, that there's almost this way in which he and I were destined to become friends and to become closer friends. And so when I say it's disconcerting, what I mean is that it's like, wow, we wouldn't be as close as we are now if the accident had not happened, as he said, as if his family had not been killed by coalition forces in the bombs. But I really value his relationship deeply. So, yeah, so it really is, it's nice. Thanks for saying that you love the friendship, because I really love it also, and I look forward to being with him again.
I'm just calling dibs on picking him up again.
All right, you can do that. We'll be happy. So Paul, you did a social degree in Canada in 85 to 90. Yeah, that's when I was working on my PhD. John Rustin. Oh my gosh, yeah. I do actually have a comment on that. John Rustin sent me his book. So I was teaching my race class here at Penn State. I had just started teaching Social 19, and he actually sent me his book on race and IQ and looking at blacks, Asians, and whites. And, I said, oh my gosh, okay, this is really, whenever you get a book in the mail that doesn't have even a return address on it, right, it's, and I get that periodically, there's, okay, be careful opening this thing, right, because it's not that, I don't mean be careful like, hey, there's a bomb in there or something. I mean just whatever this is, these are dangerous ideas, right? Whatever it is, there's somebody who wants you to see what they have to say, and it's not a standard publisher, and so there's something in here that's like outside of the normal range of what we accept to be, what is acceptable, right, intellectually. So that's what I mean by dangerous. In any case, he, was making the argument of that we can see differences in IQ based on, racial groups, right? But, this is a long, this argument has legs on it that go back a long way. And it makes sense, right? Like if you think about people who first started, you start traveling around the world as, mostly it was Westerners, Western Europeans, who started doing it in a more systematic way on ships, right? So like people always migrated, right? But what you had were, is like the many different groups who were kind of traveling around on horseback and foot and so on and so forth. Their short trips on sea had the opportunity, or mostly just didn't see extreme differences in population groups, right? But when you get in a ship and you go from one continent to another continent, as we saw with the Europeans, right, coming into the Americas, had already, been, in different groups in China, but really start to see lots of different differences, and quickly, right? So suddenly you're seeing Africans and Asians and the native peoples in the Americas, right? The indigenous, which were just different Asians. You start to think things in new ways, right? So you're going to start making comparisons between these population groups because you're seeing things in different ways, right? It's like when I am on top of a building and I'm looking down from that building and I'm watching, let's say I'm watching people move and I'm watching cars and I think about one time when I was at the World Trade Center and I was just watching. I was at the top and I was watching New York City, and I had so many ideas that I had never had because I had never seen New York City from that angle. And so I started asking questions that I've never asked before. And I start thinking thoughts that I've never thought before just because I have a different perspective on things. And it happened actually just the other day. I was looking at State College from on top of Mount Nittany so I could see down onto all of State College, and I was just thinking things about State College that I never had, and I would not have thought those things had I not been sitting on a rock up on top of a mountain looking over into the valley. So anyway, when we think about Europeans getting on ships and exploring pretty quickly these different groups and starting to form hypotheses and have thoughts about these population groups, right? So naturally they're going to start to look for similarities and look for differences, right? So what is it about people in the Caribbean that's different than people in West Africa, that's different from people in India, that's different from people, I don't know, in like Greece or Italy or Scotland or Wales or something? And so these people who are kind of really studying this emergent science of sociology and anthropology and so on are starting to come up with hypotheses about things, right? Well, one is naturally going to be physical abilities and one's going to be intellectual abilities. Why are some people smarter than others, right? And now you put evolution on top of that and you start thinking about IQ and start thinking about these what appear to be cultural differences that are rooted in intellectual differences that are rooted in biological differences. You're going to come up with all sorts of hypotheses, right? Well, Westerners are, like more intellectually adept or have higher IQs. Okay, so let's study IQs, and we say, the British score higher, than people in this region, that we now call Nigeria, right, or whatever. And so there must be a reason for that. Oh, because they're British, or their skulls are larger, or their skulls are smaller, or whatever it is, right? So this is what Rusting was kind of digging into and trying to make an argument for intellectual variation based on ancestry. So these different population groups. But of course the problem is defining population groups. And the problem is, A, what is a population group? And B, we're looking at DNA you're looking at one marker. You're extracting one marker out. Then when all these markers are in play together, it's like choice and chance, right? And then measuring, trying to find some kind of measure for, let's just say IQ, which is one that he was really using a lot of that. That fits across all population groups and how the mind works and the subtleties of the mind, and I don't know how you. It's just not possible to do. Does that mean we need to completely throw it out? That there aren't some ways in which people's thinking, the brain processing, whatever that means, can't be connected to our DNA admixture or so on? No, there could be some kind of connection here, but it's immensely complex, and it is not going to be connected to the simple questions that we're struggling with. Like, for example, why is there a higher dropout rate among certain population groups in the United States than other population groups, right? It's so convoluted, but it doesn't mean to completely throw it out. But what has happened is, this is a really long response to this, but what has happened is, because people have used these things politically, right? Like, hey, black people have lower IQs than white people, and that explains black poverty or whatever, right? because people have tried to use it politically, it makes it impossible to even look at the kinds of questions that we might want to ask that's related to ancestry and DNA and so on. So that's my very long comment, but it's cool. It's cool to hear that. I haven't talked about that in a long time.
I don't know.
Blue Lagoon is watching from Jupiter.
Yeah, I saw that. I don't know. It seems like people are always trying to like determine how humans are different from one another. Like,
yeah, that's part
like
of the big questions.
Right. Like your intelligence is off of these mixtures of your DNA versus my DNA versus whatever. But I don't think it is. I think it's the situations in which we're growing up in. Like, obviously there's going to be, especially before the 1960s, like white Americans probably thought that black people were dumber, but it's just because of the fact that they didn't have an education system in place like what white people did.
Well, they had an education system in place that was that was actually quite well developed. Here, let me just say this. Better to use the example would be of, say, like indigenous peoples of the Americas, right? Here, the issue is this. We don't know the degree, we're just digging into genetics in a way. We're in the very beginning stages of understanding genetics and the complexities of it. It is a field that is just growing by leaps and bounds every year, right? There are a lot of interesting questions around genetics and the intersection between our genes and our sociology and our psychology and so on, right? And our biology, right? There are a lot of interesting questions that we haven't even begun to ask yet, let alone get to some really fascinating responses and answers to them. So the ways in which what we do is we take these immensely complex conundrums or questions that, again, they're so complex you can't even frame them without writing an entire book. And then we take these and we simplify them in some ways, right, into like a headline, and then we put that out into the world. And what I would say is, look, these things, we're going to, in another 20 years or 30 years or 50 years, if we survive, we're going to have been asking some immensely complex questions surrounding genetics, biology, sociology, psychology, etc., that these days we're not even asking, and we couldn't even begin to formulate a response to them. That's particularly fascinating and brings together all of those factors and forces. So I just trust that we will go there and we will look back and we will sort of see the ways in which people say, oh, there's a relationship, there's a correlation between, or causality between IQ and race, whatever those simplified ways of understanding both of those. It's kind of like people using leeches in the past to heal the body in some ways. People will look back at us today in the way we use chemotherapy. And, we poison our bodies in order to kill cancer. And people will look back in 50 years and say, oh, my God, I can't believe that that's what they were doing. But it's all we knew how to do. And so genetics research is going to take us to some really fascinating places that we don't even know about today. So those simplified questions that we're asking today are not going to be discussed in the future. So it's really cool. I hope I'm around long enough to see it. But I don't, but there is a connection. There's a really fascinating connection that geneticists are going to walk us into. So hang on. Black people look at other identifying blacks and sometimes notice racial mixtures based on complexion, facial features, etc. Do white people look at other identifying whites and think they aren't white? Totally. Yeah. And most white people, I did this in class. It actually kind of failed that way, and it failed in a way, and I didn't. So I first noticed this when I was the first time I traveled in Europe. So I was 21, 22 maybe. I had a Eurail pass, and I had been studying in Spain, and then I went to Italy, and then I backtracked and went through, like Austria and what is now Croatia, and like Switzerland and France and so on, Netherlands. And every time I would get off a train and I would start walking around, I'd see people that looked just a little bit different, right? The Germans were different than the Italians, and the Italians were different than the French, and the French from the Dutch, and so on, right? And I started to say, wait a minute, hang on, and this is really fascinating, right? Because in the United States, we're very much a mixture. So, if you go to the Italian community, say in some city where people have a higher percentage of their DNA admixture, like ancestry from Italy, you're going to see particular features that are going to jump out, versus the Irish community, and particular features will jump out, right? So I first started seeing these differences in white people that were really subtle. And if you weren't white, if you were with me on that trip and you weren't white, you would have gotten off the plane and you would not have seen what I saw, right? Because you have to, maybe you would if you spent lots and lots of time around white people and these different communities. But like I grew up in I started seeing people from my youth who, in Italy, who were Italian, going like, oh my gosh, that looks like so-and-so's dad, or that looks like, whatever it is, right? I was seeing certain things that I could really see well because I had spent a lot of time around white people. So this has continued all throughout my life. When I go to Europe, I just have this kind of sense of like, whoa, like I kind of know where I am. If you put me on a plane and I landed somewhere, you didn't tell me where I was, and I left the airport and started walking around, I could probably give you a pretty good sense of where I was, because I've traveled a great deal, not only in Europe, but also I meet lots of people of particular ancestries here, right? So, yeah, if white people don't have that experience, they don't know. But if you do, you would say, yeah, I can really kind of see where I'm at. So in class, in the springtime, it was when the woman from Italy, I brought her up, remember that? And I said, hey, go around the room and pick out people who you think have Italian ancestry, because you're from Italy, right? So even though Italy's, it's a big country, and, northern Italy is different than southern Italy and so on, but she wasn't fully able to do that, and I realized later it's because the class is so big and she didn't have enough time, right? But I think it's probably easier for white people. Maybe it is. I don't know. This is actually a really cool question. Let's do this. I'm looking at Mylan's. I think that's how you, again, I hope that's how you pronounce your name, Mylan. I'm looking at your question and I'm thinking to Jeff, what if we do this as an activity? What if we, white people, see if white people, so let's find the mixed people who are mixed, right, in the class. And let's bring up different people, ancestries, right? To maybe pick people who are barely mixed, right? So I'm thinking about somebody they're white, but you know what I mean? You're not 100%. You're not 100% certain that they're 100% white. Let's say, right? Just like, and see who would pick that person out better. Would it be someone who's white or someone who's not white? Right? You know what I mean?
I'm thinking the same thing for like Michael. Like, who would be able to pick out Michael's ethnicity?
Yeah. Just
by looking at him, because most people would think he's just white.
Yeah, and I can tell he's not white, but I don't know what he is, but I know he's not. See, exactly. So people like him, who we could bring up in front of the room and see who does a better job of
it. Wouldn't be him. He would kill me.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Not him, but people like him. Yeah. Yeah. That's kind of cool. So this, for example, this is how we come up with ideas in class. It's just like that. Like a question is, hey, what do white people, can they see that? Like, I don't know. Let's find out. Let's do something in class.
Yeah, and I noticed the same thing when I was in Haiti. The first time I ever landed in Haiti, I was with somebody else who was white, and we couldn't like see a difference in the Haitians, and they couldn't see a difference between us. Right. They were like, oh, it's the same person. Yeah, it's just exactly. Like, no, we're not. Like,
Yeah, yeah.
he's completely 100% German, and I have Irish in me, or I have
Yeah.
this in me, and I can see it, but you can't unless if you're really involved. So that's why there's people in America who, if you look at a person who's African American, you think all black people look the same,
Yeah.
and then people who are African American are like, but we're not even black. Like, there's a difference even in the language we use, and nonetheless how we even look and identify in our culture. Like, I can tell you the first time that I knew there was a difference between black and African American was when I was at the Blitz. It was Sean Monroe and Brandon Monroe talking about with Tyre about like how there's a difference between the two communities, and I was like, there's a difference?
Yeah, right.
And they were like,
exactly.
yeah, my mom told me I'm never allowed to date an African American woman because of X, Y, and Z. And I was just like, to me, it was the same group. So like, it happens if you're not a part of that culture or that race, then it's going to be
Yeah, well,
consistent.
people don't. I think a lot of times people don't understand that these ancestry, these complexities around culture and the struggles and so on are really, really, really pretty deep all around. But so I'm thinking about like, you know, just there are differences within a population group and then between population groups, right? And there are differences within a population group, just like you could have two people of, I don't know, Nigerian, let's say like Igbo ancestry, right? And then, but they look different because they're different people and they look different, right? But they together look different than someone from Sudan, you know, or Eritrea, let's say. So both are African, Central African, right? But one in the center, you know, like, but very different features, and yet the two would look the same here, and the other two, let's say Eritrean people, would look similar over there. Not the same, but similar, right? And so, yeah, it's so fascinating that I really enjoy these kinds of things, you know, like looking at them without qualifying in some way of positive or negative or whatever the case is. So Lou Lagoon asks about North Africa and the complex gene pool, and it's like it is just our you know, students here who have done DNA ancestry, so we call it biogeographical DNA ancestry testing, right? So looking for DNA markers that are from certain regions of the world where we've been able to isolate those markers, right? And so North African, the DNA admixture in North Africa is just immensely complex because it's just, you know, this mix of, you know, European and West African and East African and then of course all of the you know, so much DNA from what would be the Arab the regions of the Middle East. And so it's really yeah, so it's really, hey, I see, it looks like Mr. Rashidi just posted.
Yeah, he had a spelling error or something, so I think he's correcting it.
You know what? I really was on my list of, I wanted to talk to Mr. Rashidi. I was actually going to call him yesterday, and I picked up my phone, and right at that moment somebody called because I've been reading about things kind of falling apart in Afghanistan. So I do want to, Mr. Rashidi, I want to talk to you.
Yeah,
in the next couple of days.
I like to talk to people who are in Iran before the end of the summer too.
Yeah, I think it would be good, and let's plan. So listen, let's do this. Let's. I think this is a nice start. I think we're showing that, hey, this is kind of nice. No, it's really nice. Jeff, you rocked it once again. Thanks for like really getting the equipment together. You can show our new piece of the Ninja.
Oh yeah, but before that, I hope everyone saw Sam behind me peeking up. But this is our new piece of technology. You're really just going to see me, if at all. but it's a recorder. So last year we've been taking all of the content straight from our YouTube channel, and we would just like download it and then re-upload it. But the problem is we're recording in 1080, and on YouTube for some reason it would only allow us to like bring it back in 720, so less quality. And with our YouTube channel continuing to grow, and we want to be able to really have the experience of our returning subscriber coming back and having good quality, we thought we should get one of these. So we picked her up. This is the first time we're using the Ninja Flame, and yeah, it seems to be working well. By the way, it still has 3.5 hours of recording time. So there's a little thingy that tells us. And the entire thing's touchscreen, which I'm really surprised about.
Yeah. Oh, it is.
Yeah. So this entire time we've been recording, most of the time I've had the audio bars up so I could see how our audio is. Currently, we're both using different types of mics, and we didn't have time to calibrate them correctly, but got its job done.
Hey, so Mylin, who thanks for telling me that I pronounced your name correctly. You asked how many races there were to start with. Well, it's really an unlimited number. Well, you could say there's at some point, if we just follow the trajectory of the evolutionary process, at some point in time there were many different sort of variations of what later, so sort of what later become Homo sapiens, right? Our Homo erectus to Homo sapiens.
I was in D.C. a couple weekends ago, and we went to the Smithsonian National Museum of Natural History or something, and Homo erectus lasted for over 1 million years.
Long time, man.
Dude, I didn't realize that. I was like, we're the greatest because we've been here the longest. And it was like, we've been here for maybe 50,000 years.
Yeah.
And that species lasted 1 million years.
Yeah, it's really... I saw this. We were in Ethiopia, and we were able to see the bones of Lucy, which is kind of what people identify as the missing link. But... yeah, so there really are, just like today, there are no set number of ancestry race groups. It's so hard to even use that, but ancestry groups, there never really was. I mean, even sort of if you go back to what would be, if we could find the earliest Homo sapiens, guaranteed we'd find some significant differences. So, and then as people, travel around, and as people migrated to different areas, there, the certain physiological features were more adaptable in some areas than others, and different climates and different food sources and all sorts of different things, and a lot of stuff just random chance that happened. And then as population groups, as people settle in certain areas, then naturally particular features will begin to emerge as more dominant and for those particular population groups. And of course that's what we see today. And those features were really important and valuable, mostly important for the survival of those groups, but sometimes just chance, factors came into play, and so it just happened the way it happened. And so, but within all those groups are so many differences that, you could talk about, you could divide, you could just make decisions about how you're going to divide up population groups using any number of factors and forces, and they're basically a limited number that we could choose from. And so, we could go into a particular population, let's say in East Africa, and pick out, a particular region, right, and pick out, okay, well, here we have all these people living here, but let's divide it up into another, on the basis of another physical characteristic, and let's do it on height. So, like, tall people, everybody over, like 2 meters is one race group, and everybody under 2 meters is another race group, and then we could do it on skin complexion, and we could just go on and on and on. So it really is an unlimited number in a way. Hey, Ella, where are you from, by the way? Just out of curiosity. Thanks for saying hello. And so listen, Jeff, I think I'm willing to, we can hop off now. I appreciate the folks who came in to watch. I really appreciate it. We won't start class up officially till the end of August, but, you know, in any case, we'll
hopefully have a few more of these.
We'll have a few, no, we definitely will have a few more of these, and we'll have some guests, so maybe somebody who's on the stream wants to just come in as a guest, which would be kind of cool in and of itself.
If we said something during this podcast that you agree with, disagree with, or you want to just give us your thoughts on, you can call our voicemail. It's +1 814 430 3555. Again, +1 814 430 3555. It'll be down below in the description. You can also send us an email and just let us know what your thoughts are if you want to join us for the podcast. I think you said that somebody sent us an email and it's like, hey, that would be someone would be really cool to have on the show, the podcast, the whatever this live stream is, and we can make it happen.
Yeah, it would be really cool. And hey, Mona, thanks for your comment there. It's nice to know that you are watching from Pakistan. You know, it's a really awesome country. One of our Pakistani students from Lahore actually was graduating, and his family was in town last month and brought over. We spent an hour together at my house on graduation day and brought over some just lovely food, amazing food actually, and some sweets that I'm still eating actually. So,
what was that the Afghani like seeds that you had?
Oh yeah, the pistachio. No, not.
Well, they're kind of like
pine nuts.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sam was like literally eating them like one at a time, and I forget how you were opening them, but it really pissed Lori off for some reason.
Yeah, they're really hard to eat, but they're good. Hey, Arnika, nice to see you. Yeah, we'll stream again. So, Jeff, so you know, Arnika is the woman from Germany who visited class.
Yep.
And we've continued to share a lot of things back and forth, just about the kind of the rise of Nazism, where things have gone and where they are today. And there's a lot of stuff happening today that are just really, really disconcerting. So I told her we definitely need to have her back in class in the fall because there's so many things happening that are. It's wow, man. It's disturbing actually. So anyway.
Yeah, it sucks. The summer course actually doesn't have anything on the Holocaust or.
We didn't use any of those.
We didn't use any. So next summer we'll definitely use something, and it would be cool to go back to it.
Yeah.
You could still smoke in class.
Yeah, well, that was in Canada too, you know.
I guess.
I think sometimes my students smoke in here. I don't know, and I wonder sometimes. Sometimes maybe they're just using their their pens or whatever you call it. I don't know.
Yeah, who's to say? Well, there's sometimes I walk through and.
Yeah, I'll leave it go with that. I don't know.
You just outside?
All right, so listen, everyone. We're gonna head out. Thanks for joining. We will, again, we'll be back and we'll bring somebody on. It'll be kind of fun to do a conversation with some folks, maybe in a couple weeks. All right, peace. Thanks.
See you, everybody.